associate professor. Sorry. Cisco Reyes is currently an associate professor at Linfield University in McMinnville, Oregon, and also serves as a graduate program coordinator for the master's program in sports science and analytics. He's very active in the sports science community, from presenting at conferences to serving on the executive board of the NSCA's Sports Science and Performance Technology Special Interest Group. Additionally, he's also the owner and athletic performance coach of the Rise Lab. And so that is sounds like a very busy life that you lead, Cisco. So please highlight anything in your bio that I may have missed, but we'll turn it over to you. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me and giving me this opportunity. And yeah, as I was watching people come into the meeting room, seeing familiar names and faces actually making me a little bit more nervous than I was before. But I appreciate that there are some fans out there, I guess. So yeah, well, I'm excited to be here, talk about sports science. It's an avenue of training and rehab that I've really fallen in love with over the past about 10 years, starting as a strength and conditioning coach and then learning more about how to incorporate technology into the weight room, but most importantly into the classroom. Let me figure out, Landon, can I still share my screen? I had it up here. Okay, perfect. Everybody can see that? Okay. So 12 to 15 minutes isn't a lot of time. And if anything, I'm hoping this just triggers some thoughts about sports science and triggers more questions than anything. That I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation after this presentation. But I'm really going to be talking about in general what sports science is and just a glimpse into what the things that we do here at Linfield and how we integrate the sports science education to the sports science application between the lab and the classroom to working with our student athletes. And so when we're talking about technology, it really comes down to understanding the technology and understanding what fits for you and who you're working with, your budget, your space, and then just being just savage at the basics with those technologies. And then you can then grow from there into how you're utilizing the technology all the way to increasing the amount of technology that you have. And all sports scientists have made the mistake of purchasing what we call $20,000 paperweights. It's happened to all of us, but I'm hoping that at least after this presentation, you'll start to think about more, what are the questions that we need to be solved, and what are the handful or less pieces of equipment or technology that will actually answer those questions, and then we can grow from there. So this summer, our family went through the car buying process. And if you've ever gone through a car buying process, not only is it stressful, but it's because you're dealing with a lot of money. And so when you're thinking of spending a lot amount of money on something like a vehicle, there's a lot of thought and a lot of information that needs to be collected before you make that decision. Everything from what kind of car are we going to get in this situation for us? Do we go with a gas car? Do we go with an EV? What's our budget? All the way to which dealership are we going to be working with? Which one's giving us the best rate? Which one has the best customer service? For me personally, because we've been through this before, which one has the nicest waiting room? Because I know I'm going to be there for about 5-6 hours. So myself, I was collecting a lot of information in my head on the internet, talking with friends about what is going to drive my decision to go with this dealership, with this car, with this rate. That's sports science. Sports science is really all about collecting as much information as you possibly can to then make decisions. Now, the decisions that are being made are going to be made by the sport coaches, the athletic trainers, the physical therapists, the sports psychologists, the strength and conditioning coaches, and of course the athlete themselves, because they're at the center of what we call this high performance unit that consists of the responsibilities and jobs that I just listed. So for me, one of my guilty pleasures, if you want to call it a guilty pleasure, is I'm a big fan of true crime and listening to podcasts as I try to commute from Tiger to Oregon to McMinnville, which is usually about 45, 50 minutes each way. So I need to think of something to kill time, but also take my mind away for a little bit before I come back to reality. And there is a lot of similarities and applications between what sports scientists do and what criminal investigators do. And some of my fans out there have heard me tell this story before, but people ask me, if you weren't being a professor, if you weren't being a sports scientist or strength and conditioning coach, what would you do? And I would be in law enforcement. I would be some sort of detective or criminal investigator, or working for the BAU with the FBI. And I think a lot of the reason why I could see myself doing that is because what we do as sports scientists is very similar in that we profile. We collect information and we try to profile athletes, or we try to profile criminals to kind of figure out why are they behaving the way that they behave, and what are their trends, what are their patterns. And we do the same thing with athletes. We collect information using technology to then profile, so then we can get a better sense of, why do they perform the way they perform? Why do they jump so high? Why are they always hurt? Why is their right shoulder always in pain? Why can't they seem to get over this plateau when it comes to their speed or their stamina or whatever it may be? So in sports science, we use technology to answer specific questions. And the two main buckets within sports science of why we use technology is, number one, I just mentioned, athlete profiling and benchmarking. This is probably level one of any sports science department, any sports science program, is using technology to collect information to get a better sense of why the athlete ticks. Why do they move the way they move? Why do they jump the way they jump? If I wanted to compare, like LeBron James, and profile his current levels of athleticism, why would that be important? Well, if I'm talking about long-term athletic development, starting with, let's say, elementary or middle school kids, and I'm looking at how high they jump, or their specific basketball skills, or their stamina, I need to have a sense of what is their projection going to be in regards to their overall athleticism. And we use technology to collect that information. Once we have the profile, then we can create benchmarks, so that if I'm looking at a 16-year-old male about to be a junior and their main sport is lacrosse, I have the information to then give them a benchmark to say, this is where you stand when it comes to your skill. This is where it stands when it comes to your reaction time or your speed. And if you're trying to play at Division I level at, let's say, Duke University, this is kind of where you have to get to in order to work your way to be a prospect for a big name, men's lacrosse program like Duke University. Second to profiling is we use technology to then monitor. And we want to use technology to collect physiological as well as psychological data to basically track the trends of any changes in their performance. And when I say performance, it could be physical performance, but it can also be emotional and psychological and cognitive performance, all of which is extremely important for them just to perform at the highest level when it comes to competition and games. So we can use the same technology to profile, and we can use the same technology to monitor, to make sure that the training program that's put forth by the strength and conditioning coach, as well as a sport coach, is actually leading them to increase their performance individually, and then obviously collectively, in order to win at the end of the day. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about monitoring here in regards to periodization and general adaptation syndrome, and how we incorporate technology into that. So at Linfield, when I introduce sports science to our graduate students, I talk about profiling, I talk about benchmarking. And at Linfield, one of our biggest missions right now is using technology to profile what we consider to be the 6 aspects of athleticism. And, with the Olympics just finishing, you talk about who the greatest athlete is, and usually it's the decathlon for men, or the heptathlon for females, but we all have our own opinions of who the greatest athletes are. And I always ask the questions like, well, why do you feel that, a LeBron James or a Steph Curry or a Lamar Jackson or a Caitlin Clark, like, why do you consider them to be like the world's greatest athlete? And we all have our own definitions, but for us at Linfield, in regards to the specific aspects of sports science, an athletic person is someone who holds high benchmarks across each of these 6 domains of athleticism. So one, you have speed. So we can use technology to measure how quickly they can get from point A to point B, both in a linear sense as well as a lateral sense, which is used quite a bit in sports. We have strength, pretty straightforward. How strong are they? We can also incorporate power into that, as that's more of a combination of speed and strength. We have suppleness. So we refer to suppleness as movement capabilities, movement quality. If you've heard of the functional movement screen, we use the functional movement screen to find a way to quantify their joint stability as well as their joint mobility. We have stamina. So how long can they last? Their endurance, how cardiovascular endurance or muscle endurance. Can they perform a certain skill at a high intensity for an extended period of time? In certain sports, that's going to mean something. Then you've got skill. So something very specific to their sport, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball shooting, whether it's a slap shot in hockey, we can find ways to quantify skill. And the final one that we take pride in, because we're fortunate enough to have the technology to measure this, is what we consider to be the strategy piece. So things like visual clarity, depth perception, reaction time, perceptual memory, spatial awareness, all those types of things that come into play that can make an athlete look really fast, even though maybe physically they're not fast, but they just know how to put themselves in certain positions because of pattern recognition. So at Linfield, and in general with sports science, we use technology to try to profile and track these 6 aspects of athleticism to make sure that the program that they're performing is actually improving several of these components, if not all of them. In our breakout session, I was chatting with Paulo, who's a sports scientist in Portugal, and I kind of asked him, what are the pieces of technology that you use? In sports science, technology can really be broken down into 4 main categories. The first one are force plates, and you see that in the top row in the middle. Force plates is a standard in any sports science department in any sports science program. Number 2 would be GPS. Whether it's Catapult, which is kind of the leading brand when it comes to GPS, but some sort of global positioning system that we can use for either outdoor or indoor sports to get a better feel of load, space, direction, speed, acceleration, total impacts. Number 3 would be the use of accelerometers. In the top left-hand corner, we use eNode, and eNode are just magnetic sensors that are attached to a barbell. So if we want to track like barbell velocity, which is another way to track load as well as monitor, we can use accelerometers. And the final piece that I don't have listed on here is an athlete management system. So a software that collects all of the information and makes it a little bit easier for sports scientists to visualize and analyze, as well as just overall digest it. Because as you know, it can be a lot of information that can be taken in. Now, I get asked the question a lot. Well, what do I do if we can't afford a force plate or we can't afford a GPS, which a lot of organizations, they just don't have the ability to do that. Don't forget that it's something as simple as a stopwatch, something as simple as a clipboard and pen, that's sports science. You're finding a way to quantify something and you're simply writing it down. There's a lot of validity and reliability that comes into play when it comes to that, but I understand that some schools, some organizations just don't have the financial resources to buy a GPS unit. There's a lot that can still be done with the naked eye, and I just want to emphasize that to people because I don't want you to think that sports science is only tied to thousands and thousands of dollars of technology. Remember, be savage at the basics. Be really, really good at the basic things before you progress, and only focus on a few things with technology so you're not completely overwhelmed with all the information that you can get. So having high-tech equipment can be great, but it can be very overwhelming because you can be collecting so much information. I've had presentations in the past about force plates, and I geek out and I get into all the numbers with force plates that at the end of the day, jump height still means something. It can be still very significant when it comes to tracking progress in training. And there's a lot of equipment that's not very expensive that can still track jump height. Something as simple as a wall and chalk can do that for you. And that's sports science. Keep that in mind. With sports science, we're monitoring. And so I'm not going to get into the whole periodization model here, but we sports scientists have to understand models of periodization so we can talk the same language as sport coaches as well as performance coaches. Because at the end of the day, we're using equipment to monitor stress, recovery, and fatigue, or I'm sorry, and fitness. So there's a balance between fitness and fatigue that sports scientists can track to make sure that they're trending in the correct direction when it comes to performance. If fitness outweighs fatigue, performance is going to go up. So we can use things like a force plate. One of our grad students at Linfield is doing his summative research on tracking sprint speed on a regular basis to see how fatigued they are based off of how fast or how slow they're running. So if the fatigue outweighs the fitness, performance is going to go up. On the contrary, if fatigue is greater than fitness, performance is going to go down. So then, therefore, we have to have the conversation with coaches and strength coaches, not make the decisions, but have the conversations with them to say, here's data that we collected, and we're finding that they're getting more tired. So your periodization model might need to change a little bit. If you've got that big game coming up against your rival in 2 weeks, you might want to start thinking a little bit ahead on how you can fight that fatigue, improve their fitness so that their performance will be ready to go in that big game and match. So with sports science, you can consider us as stress managers. And the beauty of what we do when it comes to monitoring, and Paulo mentioned using subjective questionnaires, that's something that we use at Linfield. The beauty in something as simple as a subjective questionnaire that I really appreciate is that it allows us to build relationships with the student athletes. If they report something, we can have the conversation. Well, what's going on? Is there something that we can do to help? Is there something like a resource or a support that you need to help you with your school so you're not feeling as overwhelmed as, or stressed? Or if it's something more physical, did you talk to the sports med staff about your aches and pains? Can I educate you on some basic nutritional stuff that's going to help you with your recovery? Athletes don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's one of the biggest messages that at least I relay to our grad students within sports science is the tech is cool. It collects a lot of information, but do your best to educate and engage and empower the athletes that you work with the tech so that you build relationships with them and they start to feel empowered in their own tracking of progress when it comes to training. Again, that was a lot of information, about 12 to 15 minutes, but it was a very broad overview of what sports science is and gives you a bit of a glimpse of what we do at little old Linfield with our growing sports science program. And this is my contact info in regards to the to social media. I'm pretty active on that. But I guess Landon, Hannah, at this point, I'll take any questions that I can cover and chat more about sports science in general.
No, that's fantastic, Cisco. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll open it up for questions. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. And then just one note, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And we're just starting Gain Makers up. We really want it to continue to grow. So we would love your help in doing that. So if you'll put your name and mailing address and or if you'll email me that and the size of t-shirt you want. We just did another run of fit t-shirts, so I'll get those sent out to you if you'll just give me that information. So go ahead and let's jump into Q&A right now.
I'd like to go first. So are there certain sports that this doesn't really apply to, or some of this detail doesn't apply to, like curling, figure skating, breakdancing, some of the things that are considered sports, but maybe not?
Great question. One of the actually, it's funny you mentioned one of the sports I would love to work with is I would love to work with break dancers because it's funny you mentioned that, Elaine. I think they're the best athletes. That's me. There are certain ones at the Olympics you shouldn't watch. That was kind of cringeworthy, but if you watch the actual like Red Bull competition, When you talk about some of those aspects of athleticism, like they are amazing. They are really amazing at what they do. So with that said, like I feel that every sport could be, well, number one, every athlete could be profiled. So even with something, let's say like curling, like figure skating, there's something about them physically and cognitively that makes them very successful at their specific sport. So using technology, again, whatever that may mean to people, to get a better understanding of why is that person on the national curling team? They must be doing something special in order to make them good. I know it's a team sport, but even something like saber or fencing, those individuals are really good at something, whether it is something more cognitive than it is physical. And then in regards to monitoring, all those athletes train, like they're doing something to train to become better at their specific sport, whether it's individual or a team sport, that we can still use technology and questionnaires to kind of track where they are. So then we can make decisions and adjustments accordingly so that we don't lead to overtraining, if that makes sense. Or we lead, God forbid, we lead to an injury because we just didn't monitor and we didn't track them enough to get a better understanding of like their joint mobility had changed because of some circumstance. So I appreciate you asking that question, but I feel that every athlete, there is a level of sports science that can be applied to them.
Very cool. Thanks.
Dr. Delden, you have your hand up.
Hello, Dr. Reyes. I have a question regarding benchmarking. Let's say you have a high school coach that's on this call right now, and does vertical jumps with their high school soccer players. How do they know if those numbers are good? And this is the first time doing it for their team. How would you go about looking and say that this is the top of the players, this is the bottom of the players, if you will, for explosiveness or power, but also compared to other high schools or other girls or boys of that age? How would you go about that process? It happens a lot at the college level where I work, where a coach goes, well, is that good or bad? And I'm like, well, let me find some data at the collegiate level. But how would you go about doing that?
So are you asking me as a high school coach that's doing it, or as like the professional that's kind of consulting with this high school?
Right now, if you're talking to someone in this room that goes, how do I know if my players if these values are good? What should I do?
Yeah. So a couple ways to attack that. There's different avenues. Number one is have someone help you dig through the literature and find, if we're using jump height, for example, what is the published literature on vertical jump heights for males between the ages of 12 to 18? And then use your numbers to then compare to, the handful of research articles that you use, that you can then start to come to a conclusion of, okay, well, they're using, let's say they're using swimmers, but I have soccer players. Okay, well, there's obviously a little bit of physical difference there, but this other article uses American football and I have soccer players. Okay, there's a little bit more similarity there. So that's one avenue, is being educated or having someone support you in digging through the literature. Number two is communicating with other coaches, other programs, finding ways to collaborate. The beauty of our field is we have 20 participants on this. People go to conferences. The beauty of our profession is that we're not secretive with the things that we do. Like, we work to learn from other people. And so if in our breakout room, I was just talking to Richie Handy, who's a strength coach at UP. We both use Hawkin plates. And we were saying, like, well, we need to put our heads together, or in this situation, we need to put our software together, our clouds together, and kind of figure out what is good. Like, if I have a football player here at Linfield that jumps 27 inches on the force plate, is that good? Like, what are your Division I athletes jumping? Because for us, it's 100%, 100 percentile, but maybe that's not good. So there's research, there's collaborating with others who are kind of within that same realm. And then the third avenue is just start collecting your own data and then establish that over a long term, 5, 7, 10 years, that after a while, you can then start to benchmark your own program because you're getting the same kind of, homogenous group of individuals coming through, let's say a soccer club, that after a while, you can have enough data to say like, yes, like 16 inches is, 80th percentile. So you're jumping higher than 80% of the individuals that have ever played with this program. So for me, those are kind of the three main avenues that you can use to kind of make sure that your numbers not only make sense, but that you're doing the right, you're testing the right things, and you actually are dealing with very explosive athletes if they are jumping high.
Thank you.
Cisco, one question I wanted to run by you. Let's take, for example, force plates. When you have your athletes come in and you do the assessments on the force plates, what are the metrics that you're keeping your eye on for the most part? Like, what are the most 3 to 5 most important metrics there? And then how do you where do you go from there? Do you use that to inform interventions, or could you take us through that kind of thought process?
No, absolutely, and thanks for asking that. That's a little right up my alley, because that's actually one of the presentations that I've given at NSCA conferences is looking at these jump metrics, because we rely on Hawken quite a bit. Like I said, jump height, that's still a very tried and true metric. If you look at the literature, jump height is easy to collect, and it's still very sensitive enough to track any changes in performance for both the efficiency of the effectiveness of the program, as well as for the sake of fatigue. Jump height is still very, 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 very good to use. At Linfield, you look at jump momentum, and we look at jump momentum specifically for our football team because it is a collision sport. Being able to move, so basically being able to create a specific amount of energy based off of how high you're jumping and your body or your body mass, that means something in a sport like football. So if you have someone who doesn't jump very high, but they weigh a lot, they're probably creating a lot of momentum, which can then be used to profile for maybe positions based off what they do. The other four that we look at breaking rate of force development, we look at average relative propulsive force, and we look at relative propulsive impulse. Those three give us a sense of their eccentric, isometric, and their concentric, basically, strength. So to kind of answer your question, Landon, is we take those three metrics, we normalize it to the population, kind of getting a little bit back to what Dr. Delden was asking, that we can then look at the ratio of each of those three metrics to then tell us how they're jumping and what type of strength they need to develop. So if breaking rate of force development is low, that gives us an indication of their eccentric strength or their ability to create energy going into the jump. If average relative propulsive force is low, that's what we refer to as the amortization phase in the stretch shortening cycle. So it's that transition from eccentric to concentric, which tells us that they need to develop their isometric force or their isometric strength so they can transition better. And then the last one is the relative propulsive impulse. That number, because it's impulse based off the biomechanical sense of force times time, the relative propulsive impulse gives us a sense of their ability to produce force over a range of motion. So now it's a range of motion issue. So if that number is low, then that tells us that they might have some hip mobility type of issues because they can't triple extend their hip, they can't extend their knee, they can't extend their ankle. So then we can dig a little bit deeper to kind of figure out, okay, what's the range of motion issue on why you can't produce force for a long time. So those are kind of the three. And then the last one after that, we look at reactive strength index modified, which is basically like their explosive factor. So how quickly can they get up to a certain height? It's basically their jump height divided by their time to take off, or how long it takes for them to create that jump. Those are the main metrics that we look at. And then we're in between sports performance directors directors right now, but ideally we would take that information and give it to someone like a strength and conditioning coach, and then they can personalize the programs based off of what those metrics mean. And anyone that's out there, I'd be more than happy to share that presentation that gets way deeper into those counter movement jump metrics. So I said, Landon, that's a really good question, because people that I talk to, they use different metrics, and it jives with them. And I'm like, I think that's great. I think that's great that you use different metrics, and I can learn from them on why they use those metrics as well. So if there's anyone else out there that uses force plates, I'd love to hear what metrics that you're using, because it might, I might be missing something too that I need to include into their profiling. Yeah, let's see here. I have my social media handle, but I'm also going to include my Linfield email in the chat. So, Bray, thanks for reaching out. But if you want the presentation, just shoot me an email, and then I can easily attach the PDF. Thanks, Bray.
Then Cisco, I'm curious also, kind of more in general, because you've had some experience both on the institution side and then also on the business side, as you've been building up Rise Lab. With all of that, are there like 2, 3, 4 books that have been the most helpful to you in all of that experience?
That's a good question, Landon. I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I am not a big book reader, and it's not because I don't want to. I just don't have the time to sit and read books. I would love to get into books. When it comes to the development of both the academic as well as the business side, I've been very fortunate to be around really high quality professionals here in Oregon, that have really taken me under their wing and kind of helped me learn the differences between the two, but also how to merge the two together to make life, a lot more efficient. Going to NSCA conferences and just listening to some of the talks there about creating systems, which I'm big into, learning how to communicate with other members of the team. Those types of talks is really what helps me with my continuing education. But yeah, Landon, there are so many books that people have recommended to me that I would love to be able to sit down and read, but I just don't. I shouldn't say I don't have the opportunity. I just haven't chosen to prioritize that, right now. So same thing. I would love to learn about what books people are reading, just to make me more aware of how to be a better leader, in general.
Any influencers or any websites that you find yourself visiting for some of that education or some of that information?
Yeah, a lot of it is through social media, for good or worse. But Fergus Connolly, he's a world-renowned sports scientist. I think last I heard he was at University of Michigan. He's not there anymore. But Fergus Connolly's got some great content on just sports science education in general. One of our adjunct professors here at Linfield, his name's Dean Riddle, and Dean Riddle is another world-renowned sports scientist who spent time in the Premier League and in the NFL. And I personally am so blessed to be able to have him as a mentor. He helped build this program. He's helping me on a regular basis with not just the academic side of our grad program with sports science, but just giving me little things about just personal stuff. Like, as I try to bridge the two, like you said, the business and the institutional, he'd be like, please don't go down this route. Like, I don't want this to affect your reputation or affect Linfield's reputation. He's been tremendous in just my personal development within sports science. My former, believe it or not, my former students or even current students, like I learn a lot from them as well. And just hearing their drive and hearing how they're developing and trying to achieve personal success, both for jobs as well as just being better people. They really keep me young, but they also keep me driven to be the best version of myself that I can be as well. But there are a lot of people. Drake Burbrit, who's at Hawken Dynamic, like he's another just outstanding resource when it comes to anything sports science related. But yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot of my former students are doing really big things now that it's really cool to be able to learn from them.
That's fantastic. I love that. Um, Switching gears just a little bit, could you give us an insight into sort of at Linfield how you have created a high performance environment and some of the challenges and some of the wins that you've had as you've brought everyone together?
Yeah. It's easier at a smaller school. I mean, it really is because for one, at smaller schools, coaches wear multiple hats, professors wear multiple hats. So it's a little bit easier to relate with each other when we're trying to combine certain things because that's just how we think already is I'm going to have to do a little bit of this, but I'm also going to have to do a little bit of that versus a bigger institution. Like you only have to focus on one thing that it's a little bit harder to kind of step out of that silo and you know, try something else or try to collaborate with someone else. So with that said, the biggest win is just getting the coaches interested in this and not getting a lot of pushback from the coaches when I approached them or I approached them 3 years ago and said, hey, like we have this idea. Is that something that we can incorporate with your team so the students are learning and getting their education, but then they're also working hands-on with you and your team are getting all this information? And pretty much every single team has been completely on board. And they've been super patient with me as we continue to build this program. I'm a one-man show when it comes to sports science. Again, we don't even have a sports performance director right now. So they've been super patient with me and just understanding that I'm trying to do all of these different things, but sometimes it can be really hard to, tie everything together. With that said, I think the con of everything has been the fact that Linfield just doesn't, I'll be honest, we don't really have a lot of resources right now, both manpower as well as financial. So to be able to bring on someone to help me or to increase my compensation, which, in order to offset the things that I'm doing, one of my grad students, Tanner, he's here. He knows how overworked faculty members are at Linfield, and there's no extra compensation for it. But with that said, I mean, I love what I do. Like, I love the students that I work with. But when it comes to building the program, that's the benefit, working with great students, working with very cooperative coaches. And then the downside is we could be doing so much more, but we just don't have the resources right now to be able to do that.
But it sounds like most of the coaches were kind of on board with that vision.
Yes, they were. And at that time, our athletic director, he was a driving force behind it. I mean, he brought me from my previous university to Linfield because he had this vision and he knew that I was already doing sports science stuff at Concordia, that he recruited me to come to Linfield because he wanted to build this master's program. He wanted to build this lab. And with his support, and then as I had the conversations with the coaches, they were all just like, yeah, I think this is great. Especially as you all know, when I mention how this could be like, it can help in recruiting. So when they bring a student athlete in and they say, this is your training, this is your sports science, this is how we monitor. For a student athlete to come in and be like, oh, you're doing basically D1 stuff at a D3 level. Landon, we're getting recruits because of that. They see the vision, they see the system in place. That they basically get, like I said, they're being treated like a D1 athlete at a D3 school, but with a lot more compassion because we are smaller. One of our grad students came from a school very much like Linfield, like just 45 minutes away. And I remember his first couple months in the program, he was like, we did not have anything like this, where he went. Like, this is amazing, the care that you guys give our student athletes with, again, the monitoring, the testing, the relationship building, all that type of stuff. So it's been great to build. It's been great to see grow, and yeah, it's exciting to kind of see where we could be headed in the next several years too.
As you've been putting all of those blocks together, did you get any of the blocks out of order? Do you have kind of
Oh,
some,
yeah.
yeah, could you give us some maybe suggestions on if somebody wanted to put those blocks in correctly from the get-go?
Okay. Yeah. So, oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone that's listening, I did everything ass backwards. And so you ask a great question because there are so many things, you talk about like, or I said $20,000 paperweights. Like I unfortunately did several of those. Like I said at the beginning of this presentation, what are the main problems that you are trying to solve with sports science? And when I say, what are the, like, it shouldn't be a lot. It maybe is only 2 or 3 things. If those are your 3 or your, 2, 3, maybe 4 problems that you're trying to solve, then think of what the 2 to 3, 4 pieces of equipment or technology that you're going to need to solve those problems. At that time, I was granted like all this money to build this program. And unfortunately, when you have that much money, you start seeing these things, you start hearing these things. You yourself start thinking like, well, we could use it in this way, we can use it in this way. And then once you have it and you're in the line of fire of having to do some of these sports science things, and you're like, then you look back and you're like, shoot, we never used that. Like, why did I even think that is something that we would use, because we don't even use it anymore because we're only using these 3 pieces of equipment. And so if anyone is having the opportunity to go through building a sports science program, I would be more than happy to help, because yeah, I made so many decisions and things that I should have done at the start. Another big one too, I will say, is the NSCA does have the certification in sports science, and they have the textbook. Use that textbook to drive your curriculum, because not only for the sake of certification, like getting your students certified in sports science, which is what we're achieving to do, but the textbook itself, literally, like there are outlines in there on what you should do when you're building a sports science program. And I did not read through the whole textbook prior to starting this, because the textbook came out a year after we started the program. I knew the certification was coming because I'm on that special interest group that Landon mentioned during my introduction. So after that first year, and I got my hand on the textbook and I started reading through parts of it, that's when I was like, oh crap, like I shouldn't have, why did I even think of getting all of this when we really only needed force plate, GPS, an AMS from the very start, and then we just kind of build off of that. Bray, ask a question. Oh yeah, Bray, that you asked. So Bray asked a very specific question. Oh my God, Bray, like you and I definitely need to talk, because Top Gun was like my favorite movie when I was a kid. So he's dealing with fighter pilots. And Bray just asked a question on some of the sports science things with fighter pilots. Bray, shoot me an email, and I would love to have the conversation with you, especially with some of the cognitive things, because I need to go track it down. But in one of the more recent strength and conditioning journals through the NSCA, they had some articles in there about F1 drivers and some of the cognitive stuff with F1 drivers. I think that would be a good starting point for you with some of these things. And I just want to know more about what you're doing with that tactical population. But yeah, Bray, please shoot me an email and let's chat some more.
We're back at the top of the hour, so I want to let everyone get back to their schedules. Thank you so much, Cisco. This was really informative. I can't wait to get back into the recording and go through some of it again. We will be sending this recording out to you guys via email, so you can have access to that. And then again, please email me for that t-shirt, and we'll get a fit t-shirt out to you. We just want to continue to build this, so please recommend and bring friends for next time. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you, Cisco, so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for jumping on.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Cisco.
Thanks, Tanner. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.